Well, we've been looking at the custom house in our videos, and before we move on to 6th Street, there's a couple of photographs that I came across that I found interesting, and I thought you might enjoy looking at these as well. These are a little bit more current than the photographs we've looked at in the last couple of videos. These are a photograph of workers that are working, looks like on the cupola of the federal building. I'm not sure if he's working or taking a selfie. The reason I want to see these is that uh, looking at the background behind the workers, I think that's always what's important. So many pictures we see, whether it be a parade or whatever, the important stuff is really in the background. And that's the same case here. This is what it looks like today, but this is what it looked like in another century from the same point of view. This picture was taken from the cupola as well. This is a building that was at that location prior to the old Michigan National Bank being there. Can't really see the side of it, but in this photograph you can. That's the side of the Exchange building, and more important here, look at these three buildings over here on Military Street. Look at the variety and the architecture. If you're like me, you wish you had a time machine so I could go back and look at these beautiful buildings. Well, you don't have to go back. Those buildings are still here. These have been beautifully restored. And on the second building, you can see that it's missing the triangle crown on top of the roof. But other than that, it's the same. And then on this third building, as you zoom in there, you can still see the circles. They're not quite as decorative as they were in the black and white picture, but they're still there. Same building. We are indeed fortunate to still have these buildings that we can enjoy, just like the people did back 100 years ago. On the other hand, when you look at the work being done on the west and looking at the background here, you don't see really anything that's old. Well, you can say the high school, but that's actually the latest high school at that location. There were two other high schools before it there, and in this photograph here you see the first one. This one was destroyed by fire, and then you see St. Stephen's Church just to the north of it, and that was demolished for the college. None of these buildings that you see in the foreground are there. None of the houses that you see over by the college are there anymore. And of course, the swing bridge isn't there anymore. And the manufacturing, the lumber mill and some of the other manufacturing along Black River is long gone. So unlike on the eastern view, this view is almost completely new. None of the buildings on both sides of Water Street are there anymore. The large red building in between the church and Sturmer's, the Metropole Hotel, no longer there. And the First Methodist Church is no longer there, at least that particular church. And across the street, the Loft Hotel, that's not there. And even the road, the street, Water Street, that veers off to the right, is no longer there. Today, it would go right through a bunch of condos if it were still there, but it's not. All right, let's come back down to earth, and here we are on Water Street on the corner of Water and 6th, the southwest corner. And today, basically, all it is a parking lot. When I was growing up, this building here was on the corner. It was a drugstore. And it's been a drugstore for decades and decades, probably almost 100 years. I remember it as Emerson Drugs, and it was Emerson Drugs all the way back to the 20s, maybe even in the teens. I always thought it was a unique building, mainly because of the bay window that was over the entrance, that was on an angle. In this photograph here, you get a little better look at it. You can see the extended bay window over the entrance, but you can also see an extended bay window on the Water Street side as well, a little further west. If you notice the roof line, you'll see that it goes straight across, nothing unique about the top of the roof at all. Except it wasn't always like this. As we look at this photograph here, and we zoom in down Water Street, we can see that it had a very fancy top to it at one time. But like so many of the old buildings in Port Huron that had the fancy ornamentation roof lines that extended over the actual roof, They were taken down because of liability issues. The last thing a business owner needed was part of the roof falling on the customer's head. In this photograph here that was taken decades earlier, it gives you a little better view of the building. This is when the pharmacy was owned by Charles Huber. Here's an advertisement by Mr. Huber that was put into a booklet in the year 1900. I'll let you read it at your leisure. But something I thought was interesting, it says this: the greatest success of Huber's private mixtures has been Huber's tooth powder. This wonderful dentifrice has gained its remarkable sale through the fact that it positively contains nothing that is injurious to the teeth, as opposed to everything else that was injurious to your teeth, I guess. So what was on this corner before that? In 1834, a Methodist society was founded in Port Huron with 19 members, and in 1840 it was incorporated as the First Methodist Church. In 1844, they built a church on this very corner, and unfortunately we don't have a picture of that church. This video was almost done when all of a sudden I did have a picture of this church. Thanks to Nancy Heath Osborne. We connected on my Facebook page, Port Huron History. And by the way, if you haven't checked this page out and you're on Facebook, please do. I think you'll enjoy it. Many historical pictures on here. Well, Nancy sent me this picture of the first church that was on that corner. She also sent me a picture of the second church, which we'll get to in a minute. So I redid the videos to include this. You're welcome. This building soon became too small, and they built a second church right next door, south of it. In this map from 1867, you can see the second church with that 3 on it, designating it as a Methodist church. Here's a second picture Nancy sent me, and very happy to have it because the only picture I have is the next one I'm going to show you, which isn't a real good picture. But it looks like a very nice church, and it looks like it had a lovely fountain out in front of it. However, in reality, that is the Custom House fountain, which was on this side of 6th Street, and the church was on the other side of 6th Street, so kind of an optical illusion. The church used this second building for 20 years before moving over to the Lapeer Avenue Church. During the Civil War, this building often converted to a community center for many wartime activities. We'll get to the other 2 churches that the First Methodist Church built on Lapeer Avenue in a different video when we get to that location. We've seen this photo before when we were looking at the Custom House, but it gives you a picture of the second church. You can see it right here in the background. The first church, however, is no longer there. Where did it go? Well, that's an interesting story. Before 1857, missionaries served the Catholics of the community. They met in homes and in a loft on Pine Street. Reverend Lawrence Kilroy came to Port Huron in 1857. He purchased the first little Methodist church on 6th Street for $300 and had it moved to the triangle of Lapeer Avenue and Water Street, where the Loth Hotel used to be. Later on, Christopher Loth would buy the old church and turn it into a saloon, and you can see it here on the Sanborn map. The saloon was so profitable he was able to build his hotel there. This was a temporary location for the Catholic Church. They had bigger plans for a bigger church and a nicer church, a brick church, a church that most of us remember as being on the corner of Erie and Broad Street, or today McMorran. The cornerstone for this new church was laid in 1865 and the foundation completed. The work ceased because of lack of funds. These were the Civil War years and was not resumed until 1868. When Reverend Edward Van Lowry became pastor. He remained until 1891. Much building was done in his pastorate. He placed the first brick on the foundation, and by December 17, 1868, the building was completed and dedicated on that day. The first parsonage, which you see here in this picture, was erected in 1869 and 70 at a cost of $4,000. The 4-room school was opened in September of 1880 with 279 pupils, and and was later enlarged to 8 rooms, and that's also shown here. And here's a photo of Reverend Van Lowry. Most of us don't remember the St. Stephen's Church with a steeple on it. I don't even remember when the steeple was off and it had this little roof here on it. But I do remember when the church looked like this. So that tower has gone through some transformation. So what happened to that little church after they built that hotel? Did they tear it down? Nope. They just moved it across the street on Lapeer to the other side, and they made a creamery out of it. It would later go on to become a feed barn, and then a garage, and finally the building was torn down. All right, let's get back to 6th Street, and you recall this building here. The south side of this building, along with the building next to it, has gone through some transformations during the different years, during the different decades, actually. For example, it looked like this in 1918. This is the Wright and Hoyt Insurance Company. And you can see the extended bay going over the entrance of the drugstore over to your right. Decades later, it was the radio studio for WTTH, 1380 on your dial, but probably better known as WPHM today. But for much of the early years, WPHM was known as WTTH, the original call letters standing for the Times Herald, TTH. The newspaper operated the station from its debut in 1947 until 1970, when it was sold to Interform. Following its acquisition by Interform in 1970, WTTH's call letters were changed to WPHM to more accurately reflect the station's commitment to community service. WPHM, Port Huron, Michigan, PHM. I found this old photograph of WTTH assisting in a program to provide toys for needy children. I'm throwing this in for no charge. WPHM built this new building over on Military Street, and that's where their studio was. And I believe today, I know today they're no longer there, but I believe today they're on the corner of Glenwood and Huron Avenue. Let's go back to this photograph again. If we scan to the left here, we see that there's another large building right next to it. And this would be the new Times Herald building. Well, not new as we know it today, but new in 1913. If you recall, the Times Herald was on the north side of Water Street, almost directly across from where the new one would be built. The Herald Printing Company was also in with the Times Herald, and when they moved into the new building, the Herald Printing Company went with them. And of course, it made the front page of the Port Huron Times Herald. The building would contain over 18,000 square feet of floor space, and the basement in which the presses would be located is the largest in the city. The basement also extended 3 feet above the street line, giving clear view of the presses from the street. And it will be absolutely fireproof, of brick, steel, and concrete construction. And I thought this was interesting. In fact, the building would be so built that it would be possible to build a bonfire in any room of the building and confine it to that particular room without doing particular damage to the rest of the building. And here we have a photograph of this building. This photograph was taken in 1921 of the Times Herald composing room. Remember this photograph from earlier? Well, the picture wasn't taken to display the architecture or the name of the company that inhabited that building. I didn't show you the whole picture. This photograph was taken in 1918, and here we see the newsboys lined up in front of the Times Herald, ready to bring papers announcing the end of World War I. I always enjoy pictures like this, so let's just kind of zoom in and take a look at these boys. Newspaper boys are pretty much a thing of the past. There might be a few around, but not like there used to be. And we've all seen the movies where the newspaper boys are saying, "Extra, extra, read all about it." Well, very few of us have actually seen those boys in person. I have. When President Roosevelt died, they had the extra edition, and the boys were on most blocks. saying those very words. And I was with my dad. I was just a boy at the time, and we walked from our house on Michigan Street down to where Huron Avenue and Pine Grove come together, and there's a newspaper boy hawking the papers there. So it was an experience that I kind of look back on fondly. Not that the president died, but the fact that I got to see that in person. You just don't see that anymore. This photograph here and the next photograph we'll be looking at are both Times Herald boys selling the extra edition paper of the death of President Roosevelt. Here's a fleet of the Times Herald trucks to deliver the papers to the paper boys, at least the paper boys that weren't close enough to walk to the Times Herald building. Here's a picture that is very old, taken in 1916, and this is the Port Huron Boosters City Band. And you can see the Times Herald building in the background. The people in this building delivered the news to the people of Port Huron up until 1980. That's when they moved to a different building, 911 Military Street. Port Huron Times Herald now is just a shell of what it used to be. This building has been sold to Michigan Mutual Insurance Company, and the Times Herald only leases a couple offices on the second floor, I understand. I remember as a young man waiting for the Sunday paper. I could hardly wait to get my hands on it. I loved all the ads, I loved the news, and it was a heavy paper. It was really thick. I'm no longer living in Port Huron, but people I'm in contact with say it's just a thin paper now. And it's not only a Times Herald problem, it's newspapers across the country, mainly because of the internet. But there was a day when the newspapers ruled Port Huron. Just take a look. In this city directory, there's 11 newspapers that came out to inform the folks of Port Huron. Let's look at some of them. The Port Huron Commercial, the Port Huron Weekly Times, the Port Huron Daily, the Port Huron Daily Press, the Port Huron Republican, X-Rays, the Sunday Herald, and the Fort Gratiot Sun. These newspapers are all gone. This building is now gone. Today, it looks like this. But there was a time when this plot of land looked like this. Join me in my next video, and we'll talk about it.